Okay, welcome everyone back to the CAMILLE Diaries Symposium. This is the final session. We are going to have first we're going to have a talk by Eben Kirksey, and then we will make a closing statement and take any final questions from the participants, but also from the audience. If you're watching this on YouTube or via Facebook, you can write comments on either platform. Our team member, Natasha, will send us those questions. Okay, so we've had a really fascinating 8 hours so far. So an amazing introduction with a talk by Astrida Neumannis, and then 3 really amazing, really strong panels. We had planned to have Ida Benke as well as Eben here this evening, as they were both conceived the M/Others and Future Humans open call in 2017 and 18 that led to this exhibition. We were invited by Ida in spring 2018 to be part of the curatorial swarm. Ida cannot make it this evening, but we do have Eben here. So I'll give a quick introduction to Eben and then he can start his talk. Eben Kirksey is an American anthropologist who specializes in science and justice. He did his PhD at the UC Santa Cruz, and where he studied with Donna Haraway and Anat Singh. He is currently an associate professor of anthropology at Deakin University, Australia, and also a scholar at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton. He has written a number of books, The Freedom in Entangled Worlds, about West Papua, and also the very well-known Multi-Species Salon. I think it's the first time I really became aware of your writing, which is it's a fascinating book that it was connected with a series of exhibitions. So really, in a way, a kind of a forerunner to the project M/Others and Future Humans. He has also been a visiting professor at Princeton University, University of South Wales, Graduate Center at CUNY, and a postdoctoral fellow at the National Science Foundation. Later this fall, St. Martin's Press is publishing his new book, The Mutant Project, an insider's account of the CRISPR experiment that led to the first genetically modified children. And what's interesting, I think we've touched upon this earlier in today's conference, but he will tell a little bit about not only the process of doing that research, but also about the actual case studies of the children who had their genome altered by Dr. Jiankui He using CRISPR. So I am very honored to welcome Eben Kirksey.
Thanks a lot for including me in the wonderful program you put together, Chris. It's been a delight to listen to these fabulously smart presentations and also engage with these artworks. So picking up where the discussion left earlier today about this this experiment that captured headlines a couple of years ago, the birth of these 2 children, Lulu and Nana, triggered a controversy about the world's first children that had been created with CRISPR. The scientist at the center of the story, pictured here, whose name you just said, He Jiankui, is now in jail, and he was charged with the court for violating the law for practicing medicine without a license. But the court also said that he was pursuing fame and fortune, and that's part of his story and the story of CRISPR. The story of CRISPR is all about fame and fortune, not just for this particular individual, but for a whole bioscientific enterprise that's very quickly trying to remake the facts of life itself. And I think Dr. He's story is a cautionary tale for many others who also seem very interested in trying to alter DNA. One of the dominant metaphors using, let's see if I can get this. One of the dominant metaphors for talking about CRISPR is as an editing tool, as if DNA is a code that you can easily read and cut and paste. But I prefer another metaphor. I think the predator drone that sometimes hits the intended target, but sometimes takes out the wedding party, is a more accurate depiction of what actually is taking place at a molecular level. A lot of other metaphors have been offered to try to grapple with CRISPR, and we heard about the importance and inevitability of metaphor earlier today. In addition to the targeted missile, people have talked about the surgeon's scalpel with gene surgery, the hacker's code, but each of these metaphors reveal things about how it works, but also conceal messy cellular dynamics. This is why in my book, in absence of a perfect metaphor, ultimately I settle on technical language to describe what this molecule does. It's an enzyme, CRISPR, that produces targeted mutagenesis. In other words, CRISPR generates mutants. So those of us who read cultural theory have been hearing about mutant transformations to humanity for a long time through the work of Donna Haraway, Rosie Brododi, many others who've written about the changes to our social, technical, and biological systems that have been enabled by 20th century technology. If you page back to the original Cyborg Manifesto in 1984, you see a guide to using these genetic engineering technologies, a guide that's kind of formulated in conversation with Afrofuturist science fiction, people like Octavia Butler, who imagine this post-apocalyptic world where humanity survives by entering into these problematic partnerships with alien others. Butler's Xenogenesis trilogy talks about how survivors of a nuclear holocaust basically are forced into these promiscuous liaisons with aliens who both enable a future for humanity, but also curtail our agencies. The result is partially human offspring that undergo metamorphosis, losing fingers and toes, growing new sensory tentacles in their heads in place of hair. These alien, part human children are able to perceive new tastes and scent. These sensations are both confusing yet seductive, according to Haraway. More recently, Donna and I were talking about Octavia Butler's work and how she's wanting her readers to confront important conflicts where race and species, plus reproductive freedom and forced reproduction are always rubbing up against each other. The Cyborg Manifesto takes pleasure in the confusion of boundaries, but also makes an argument for responsibility in their construction. And of course, many of the art pieces that are under discussion today are exploring the boundary that genetic engineering or even other kinds of chemicals can blur, and that's the line separating humans from other species. Another bit of feminist science fiction that's informative here is Superluminal by Vonda McIntyre, and this also appears in the original Cyborg Manifesto. McIntyre imagines how some people might decide to transform their body to explore new environments like the deep sea and outer space. One of the central characters is named Orca, a genetically modified human who frolics underwater with killer whales, who illustrates the different pleasures, relationships, and responsibilities that might emerge if we were able to communicate with other animals and survive in the ocean. So for conventional thinkers, Haraway's sense of ethics or sense of politics is a horrific one. The philosophers and scientists with standard training in bioethics draw a sharp line between medical uses of this technology and uses for enhancement. And Donna, in conversation with me earlier this year, said that that's really a trap that limits interesting debate. Legitimate use versus abuse, worthy medical cures versus frivolous enhancements. And she invites us to push past these binaries, to think about ethical commitments in relation to social and ecological communities. Back to Dr. Hu's story, I really think it's a story about scientific speculation coming into contact with reality. Really, this dream has been an old one, ever since 1953, when Jim Watson stole the scientific results of a woman and popularized the idea that DNA is the master molecule that controls life itself. People have been speculating about this moment when we might alter the human species, when we might tinker with again, this metaphor, genetic code. It was the market values of Silicon Valley, a place where Dr. He trained as a postdoc at Stanford University, that prompted him to follow in the footsteps of other scientific entrepreneurs. He wanted to move fast and break things, as many others have done, from Uber, from Peter Thiel, all sorts of others. This is kind of the ethos, the market value driving the innovation economy. This was the hospital that gave him ethics approval, a very futuristic facility, and the university campus where it all took place. And in Dr. He's mind, he wasn't a religious man. He had a tool, he had a hammer, he was looking for a nail. He saw a technical problem and thought he could fix it. He knew that there had been a lot of international research on HIV. The way that HIV gets into cells is by this receptor here called CCR5. Simply break it, he thought, and the problem will be solved. As we all know, it was much more complicated than that. This is a problem, I would say, of misplaced concreteness. In identifying genetic problems and coming up with a high-powered techno-fix, you can easily forget the very complicated social, political, economic, cultural landscapes that these medical issues are situated in. The hospital that gave him ethics approval is already working on a number of other technical problems. Here's a shot that I took in their cosmetic surgery clinic, where they routinely do skin lightening treatments and also Asian eyelid removal. There's a wonderful book that's forthcoming from Sharon Hae-Jin Lee about the geopolitics of beauty, where she also talks about the misplaced concreteness of these kinds of race hacking, where people imagine that a wonderful new life will open up to them if they change parts of their phenotype, change parts of their external experience. For the specific problem that He Jiankui was trying to address in China, HIV and AIDS, like the US, like Europe right now, living with the virus isn't a big health problem. You take your medicine and your life expectancy will be very similar to normal. So my book is really dwelling on this unexpected case where a high-powered tech solution to HIV is more easier to imagine than a change in social policy. So one of the main reasons that the couple signed up for this experiment is that they could not, in their minds, safely make a baby otherwise. So the men were HIV positive, the women were HIV negative and did not want to get infected while making a baby. So in China right now, as a matter of law, HIV positive men are forbidden from using IVF techniques, including a technique called sperm washing that can let an HIV positive man have a baby with a woman with very little chance of passing along the virus. So they entered into this space where they learned about this first in man CRISPR experiment, and they saw it as a path forward to reproductive futurity. So my book is really engaging with CRISPR as a technology of self-negation. In other words, CRISPR in the reproductive context gives you the opportunity to eliminate something about yourself that you don't like. And in this case, it was parents who wanted their children to avoid the social discrimination that comes with HIV in China. There's social discrimination in the workplace. There's social discrimination if you're on the marriage market. There's all kinds of ways that living with the virus excludes you from certain kinds of life right now. But tragically, as this experiment broke, as news was unveiled at this international summit in Hong Kong, where I was speaking on the ethics panel, many of the reporters who sounded the alarm about Lulu and Nana's birth called them monsters. They called them freaky Frankenbabies, questioning their status within the human species. If you page back to the original Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's 1818 Gothic novel, she describes a creature with superhuman strength and intelligence that was driven by the desire to be loved. This high-minded creature only turned violent when he was shunned by human society. My book flips the mainstream script, suggesting that Frankenstein is an apt cautionary tale about the possibilities of devastating discrimination against a bioengineered child. The Mutant Project also engages with Haraway's Camille stories, which is central to the exhibit today, to imagine a near future world not far from present reality where parents might decide to have a genetically modified child to forge new symbiotic relationships with plants, animals, and people located together in many kinds of natural and social histories. Haraway's fables about Camille describe 5 generations of children with monarch butterfly pattern-forming genes that help the children's future work in caring for endangered critters. The first Camille, by the age of 5, is brilliantly banded with yellow and black, like a late-stage caterpillar. She also talks about other children of the compost who will be genetically engineered to take on the traits of salamanders, crayfish, and kestrels. Nested within this speculative fiction, she makes a proposal for the responsible use of biotechnology. Throughout life, the human person may adopt further body modifications for pleasure, for aesthetics, or for work, as long as the modifications tend to both symbionts well-being. So if Dr. He is focused on kind of optimizing the human, this medical application, Haraway's inviting us to expand our sense of ethics and think about who should be modified and for what end. So the speculative visions that we've engaged with today illustrate, again, new mutant possibilities for humanity. So we've encountered images of plant-human monsters, plants that are engendering transformations in fish as endocrine disrupting chemicals enter our waterways. We also heard about how one might create our own baby human plant monsters. In the city of Jakarta, Mary Magic brought our attention to the afterlife of anthropogenic chemicals in a river that runs through these urban places. We heard about possible futures for synthetic biology, where birth by a human mother could engender possibilities for other life forms, creatures that are endangered by our contemporary modes of life. We also learned about the possibility of becoming other, the uneasy alchemy that might transform human flesh into elemental chemical species. Tarsh reminded us of our chemical entanglements with other domains of life through the figure of heme. Sonia Levy illustrated possibilities of life in dead spaces of a natural history museum as practitioners not only recognize the precarity of oceanic life, but attempt to do reparative and reproductive work. These projects in different ways engage with Haraway's slogan that she introduced alongside her stories about Camille, make kin, not babies. We have engaged today with projects that are making kin with plastic, with human hormones and synthetic chemicals that go forth into the world to engender monstrous possibilities. In dwelling with the possibilities of motherhood and care, we heard about life-affirming reproductive projects that expand the horizons of human responsibility. I would like to give a presence today to the curatorial labor of Chris and Regine, and also many others who over the years have helped generate the ideas that drove the show today. Ida Benke from the Laboratory of Aesthetics and Ecology was already mentioned, and there was also a swarm of curators from the Multi-Species Salon who played a role in disseminating and formulating the Mothers, Others, and Future Humans call in 2018. Karen Bolander in Oregon, Marnia Johnston in San Francisco, Nina Nichols in Los Angeles, and Krista Dragomir in New York City all played principal roles. The original call noted that we live in an era of extinction. Capital flows, industrial infrastructures, molecules, affects, technoscientific enterprises, pharmacopornographic desires are all engendering human life. At the same time, ecological communities and multi-species worlds are experiencing an unprecedented unraveling. The fantasies about future children that are harbored in popular society, and I think in many ways are exemplified by the babies that Dr. He co-produced, are often orbiting around these ideas of perfection, the healthy, disease-free child. The right to choose, a prospective mother's right to an abortion, is perhaps the central tenet of third-wave feminism. In putting out this call, we aim to bring punk and hacker aesthetics to technologies that shape reproductive choices. We aim to illustrate flexible practices of eugenics that are already eliminating certain kinds of people from the population. People with Down syndrome, Queer people, people of color, have all historically been eliminated in these popular eugenics campaigns of the 19th and 20th century, and increasingly we're seeing the creep of new reproductive technologies that are doing this diagnostic work and then leading to selective abortions, especially for disabled people. So this idea of the cripple, this politicized word that is very much playing with the queer politics of previous appropriations, those modes of engaging with technology offer an opportunity, in the words of Alison Kafer, to shake things up, to jolt people out of their everyday understandings of bodies and minds, what constitutes normalcy, what constitutes deviance. In putting out this call, we were inviting tinkerers and thinkers to engage with what Sarah Franklin calls hope technologies, to do anti-ableist and anti-feminist work. So ableism is the idea that, you know, the fit body is normative. That's what we should all aspire to. So one of the pieces I'd like to show from the version of Mothers, Others, and Future Humans that happened in Melbourne, Australia, is this piece by Patricia Piccinini, The Boot Flower. She offered it from her broader menagerie of unsettling but oddly familiar critters. Sorry, she has this whole world that she's created that I'm sure many of you have seen. With this particular piece, we were left to wonder about the needs, capacities, and desires of the creature, a life form that seems to be a synthetic construction with human flesh. Does this creature have some use? Was it manufactured? Or is it the result of an accident, a discard perhaps, from a laboratory? There have been billions of dollars invested in the field of transbiology, this branch of science that is splicing genes from one species into another. Transbiology, according to Sarah Franklin, is not just about new mixtures, playful recombinations, but it's an attempt by the establishment to establish functional, safe, and marketable human biology. The humanoid figures populating Piccinini's imagination invite us to push past the conventional limits of transbiology. If in the mainstream it's mostly focused on medical matters, Piccinini invites us to think about radically new modes of corporeal embodiment for the human species. She invites us to think about happy accidents and think about not eliminating aberrations and deviations from the population, but to imagine new kinds of trans and post-human diversity. Our original call also noted that motherhood and otherhood is being transformed by a new kind of capitalism that is hot, psychotropic, and punk, to play with the language of Paul Procadio. Queer libidinal economies and transgressive strategies of care and multi-species kin-making are subverting reproductive conventions to generate lively possibilities amidst ongoing disasters. We're aiming to respond to systemic colonialism, capitalist austerity, and white supremacy that continues to create othered bodies. Fertility rates of Black and brown bodies continue to be conceptualized as a threat within white feminism, as Sophie Lewis reminds us in her critical takedown of Haraway's Make Kin Not Babies. Even as critical geographers note, there's an ongoing genocidal practice of mortality at place in the world. And you can see this more than ever with the color of the coronavirus pandemic. One of the other artists we had in Melbourne is the transgender Indonesian artist, Tamara Permana, who offered us a picture of her CRISPR sperm bank, a performance piece that she rolled out in the streets of Yogyakarta. And this is the same place that Mary Magic works. And I need to give Mary a shout out, not only for introducing me to Tamara, but for really in the early stages, helping me conceptualize the scope of this book project. So in this context, Tamara's work, the sperm bank, was a para-ethnographic intervention. She asked passerbys what traits they might like to change in their children if they were to take sperm from this bank. Would you like a child that's resistant to HIV? And she did this before He Jiankui did his experiment. Or perhaps you might want a child with tetrachromacy, that is enhanced color vision, this ability that some women have to see millions of colors that the rest of us are blind to. Or maybe you want a child with huge muscles, a myostatin mutant, or maybe a more conventional construct with the HRC2 gene modified to produce blue eyes. As a brown-skinned person, Tamara wanted to use the sperm bank to generate critical conversations about possible futures for humanity. Among other pressing questions she wanted to know, if parents have the option to choose the color of their children's skin, will the future have a place for brown and Black babies? In concluding today, I want you to hold the riotous diversity of art we encounter today in dynamic tension with the stories about CRISPR in clinical medicine that I related earlier from the laboratory of Dr. He-Jian Cui. And I'd like to also draw a parallel. I mentioned kind of the misplaced concreteness in Dr. He-Jian Cui's experiment targeting CCR5, the misplaced concreteness of beauty regimes that aim to, open up new individuated potentialities with these skin lightening treatments or Asian eyelid removals. And I think, critically, if we see a sort of misplaced concreteness in the figures of care sometimes, often, when we're focused on an individual or even the topos of a particular place or territory, we lose sight of the necropolitical war, these assemblages of death that are actually engendering the problems that we're trying to fix. So I think often it's the techno fix that gets celebrated rather than a broader sort of project of multi-species justice is pushing back against these assemblages of death and dying that are taking death as a usual intergenerational gift and producing these cascading chains in ecological worlds. Ruha Benjamin reminds us that the imagination is a battlefield. She encourages diverse groups of people to enter this battlefield by cultivating a counter-imaginary. And I think that's what all the pieces that you've collected here together are doing. These counter-imaginaries, these counter-hegemonic dreams are not just simply products of dominant economic interests or political agendas, but are pushing back and establishing new possibilities. So to conclude, I invite you all to sally forth after a fascinating day to imagine new multi-species futures that build on queer and crip aesthetics and anti-racist freedom dreams. Thank you.
Thank you, Eben. That was wonderful, and it brings up so many, different thoughts I've had both during the whole day and even in the conception of the exhibition together with Regina. One thing that we've come upon, and as I said, we chose the works rather from what was intuitively interesting for us. Some of the works we knew already very well, and some were brand new to us, and some were kind of in the middle. And but then we wove the theory around what we had discovered in the open call. And so the idea of the CAMILLE Diaries comes only after we've looked through everything we've chosen, and we said, wow, okay, there's a dialogue here. One thing I've especially seen while installing the work, it's kind of always been there in the background, but it was especially working with Spella and with Mary on the installing, and to a certain degree also with Margarita. And I was thinking more and more about the way that these artists are using biotechnology, and the way that we just spent a 2-year project working with biotechnologists here in Berlin. And so there's this myth of biotechnology, and there's also a reality that's much more mundane, that it's this idea that in the kind of public idea that new technologies are going to enable everything, and we're going to have, unicorns and centaurs, and in a way, and then this very mundane reality that the changes and the accuracies are much different. Even though some of the scientists we're working with, some were saying, oh, CRISPR is so much more effective than things we've had before, but there are so many imperfections in it. There's so much that can't be controlled at the same time. You think about it, it's CRISPR-Cas9 comes from basically an early bacterial immune system against phages, against viruses. It would chop up the RNA and DNA of an invading virus. So it wasn't meant to be a precise tool, and to some degree, I hear from scientists it really isn't. It's just much more precise than what we had before. But it all connects biotechnology, both as it's practiced on a mundane level, and maybe this hype that Dr. He was involved with, and also comes from the Silicon Valley area, or Theranos. That it's this idea, we could say, a hero, to channel Ursula Le Guin. It's a hero-based biotechnology, a hero-based narratives of it. And what I'm wondering is, how can we move that to a carrier bag biotechnology, a biotechnology that isn't so grandiose, but actually helps us stay with the trouble and and move forward in ways that are productive and certainly, I mean, the big difference is hero-based biotechnology is, part of this capitalist vision that, may or may not be crumbling in front of us, but certainly, isn't providing the utopia that it claimed to, in the 90s and 2000s and everything. So, we found it really interesting the way that Spelle, who comes from biochemistry, is both came from science, but is now very much an artist working with biotechnologies, and not just phytoteratology was for us a really fascinating example, but her whole oeuvre is this connection between humans, plants, and machines, but in ways that are really part of, we could say, this carrier bag biotechnology. Mary's practices, especially her DIY practice, and certainly a lot of the things she's done, which maybe connect with Tamara Permana's work, was definitely one of the pieces. And I think even this, one of the entries in the open call that really we were interested in, we just weren't sure how to feasibly realize it because of the distance and the cost and everything. And I think there was also a work she wanted to do it with an artist from the US, so that would have been really interesting, but it was just something that wasn't realizable given the means we had. And so this is, it's like a really interesting way, but again, that question of how do we go from a hero-based biotechnology to a carrier bag biotechnology to, in this, in the face of this disaster that we are living in.
Maybe if I have a moment just for a quick response. I mean, one interesting thing about CRISPR is that it's cheap. You can learn how to do it. Like I know how to do it. I think that gives us the potentiality to engender becomings in ourselves that are sort of outside of these dominant circuits of capital accumulation and normativity. I'm thinking of a science fiction story that was published recently in Clark's World, All Sorts of Flying Things by Maggie Clark. And Maggie's imagining a world where a genocide takes place. And there's a human protagonist who's like doing the detective work, naming it the genocide, demanding that some kind of justice be done. And then it doesn't end with a standard sort of conviction, a juridical legal proceeding, but it ends with the species that did the genocide, that did a genocide to protect others from this radioactive fallout of a dying last member of its kind. But the response was to engender a profound becoming in themselves. They became the thing that was killed, the agents of the genocide. So I think in contemplating potential corporeal becomings that we might create with a different kind of biotechnological configuration is perhaps an allegory for the sorts of transformative becomings we need to engender in societal processes and industrial assemblages and chemical industries and in the plastics industry, to name just a few of the things that are kind of at play in the show. And I think like the misplaced concreteness of the easy CRISPR fix or the high-powered techno fix, I think often gets in the way of a serious accounting for all the ways that our own existence is entangled in these assemblages that are dealing out death on mass scale, that are dealing out, whether it's continued privilege of certain kinds of people or these necropolitical assemblages that are taking the ocean apart, that are producing habitat loss, that are displacing people from their homes as refugees. So I think how we might engender those transformative becomings is maybe we're thinking about that a lot right now because we're all at home in bubbles and thinking about the ways that our world is contingent on the labor and well-being of others.
Okay, I want to see if this, because I noticed there are still some of the people from the previous panel listening in. Does anybody have a question for Eben, or it can also be if you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, you can make a comment, and then our colleague Natasha will send those to me. maybe you can tell us also a little bit about your upcoming book and how that's developing. So you were mentioned, I think earlier in response, a little bit about the parents of the children, and that you had interviewed them and so forth. Well, you can give away as much as you want or not give away, but yeah.
Yeah, I'll do a little teaser. And, the book started, I thought it was done when I showed up in Hong Kong for this summit. I was invited to speak on the ethics panel. I actually talked about Tamara Permamina's sperm bank. I think, all the mainstream biologists and bioethicists were really like, what's this art thing doing in the middle of our serious conversation? But the book also explores kind of mainstream uses of CRISPR in the US. So the very first CRISPR clinical trial in the States is being run by Carl June's lab, and his aim is to cure cancer. And in doing my ethnographic work to figure out like what's happening as this is rolled out, I was given a tour of the Cancer Survivor Hall of Fame. And it was all white people. And the very first gene therapy approved by the FDA is called Kymriah, and it now costs about $400,000 for a dose. So in some ways, the book is a story about innovation and inequality. The disruptive innovation economy of China, I think, is interesting on the one hand because it's thwarting long-term hegemonies in Western imperial science. And I think, part of the reaction to Dr. He Zhonghui's experiment, the negative reaction was, going back to earlier colonial fiction, Dr. Fu Manchu, the evil Oriental genius who steals Western knowledge and, threatens civilization. And, a lot of people have been talking about doing a similar experiment. And what I try to do in accounting for what happened in Shenzhen, this futuristic city where Dr. He did his work, is just really situate them in context. So in addition to sort of aspiring to import the values of Silicon Valley to China, this city styles itself as embracing the future itself. So Shenzhen famously it goes faster than any other city on the planet. The idea of Shenzhen speed was born in the 80s when they were putting up skyscrapers faster than anyone else. And that, Shenzhen is where they make your Androids and iPhones and the computers that we're talking on now. And, he was working in this entrepreneurial milieu. And, part of, I name a lot of names in the book, the Chinese Communist Party officials that backed the experiment and quickly said that they didn't have anything to do with it. The hospital that I showed you denied being involved, but I did the detective work to sort of show how they were involved, but also show the it was a really peculiar aesthetic that was at play at the hospital. But also just these very human stories about the desire for belonging, the desire to live in this world of reproductive futurity that's basically become normative. And I offered some snippets from the concluding chapter, but ultimately I'm tussling with Haraway here. In contemporary China that's lived through the one-child policy, the idea of making kin and not babies isn't catching on. So, for many years it was you must make one child was kind of the dominant norm that you inherited from your parents. And now it's a different sort of sensibility than sort of images of perfection that prevail in American baby making discourses. But there is quite an explicit discourse about eugenics. And I think all of these technologies, and I think there's also a risk again of CRISPR exceptionalism. There's all sorts of genetic testing technologies that are already in the clinic that are doing eugenic work, that are eliminating intersex people from the population, for example. People with XXY or Klinefelter syndrome, people who, boys who look androgynous, they're being systematically eliminated already. So, how might we think about the eugenic technologies that are already in play in the clinic, but also do the work of anticipatory governance and to do the speculative work to imagine how these technologies are going to be rolled out in the near future? Like that's basically what the book aims to do.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This was a great way to end the panels. I think we're going to, in a moment, Regina is going to join me and we're going to make a closing statement. and then also stay along with us. You can, as well as the other artists who are listening, and you can also, we can put some questions out there and maybe answer them as a group as well.
Maybe as a bridging to our final discussion. I don't know how much we want or can discuss after 9 hours or nearly 10 hours, but thank you, Eben, for your thoughts. And it just made me think that we have probably more than ever before to be very precise, to become aware of what do we want to do with genetic modification. I think, taking into consideration our interdisciplinary panels today, and also critical talks on biotechnology, I just became aware that we have more critically to ask than ever before, what do we want to achieve with genetic modification? Do we want to overcome biopolitical aspects? Do we want to thrive to bioethical? Do we want to achieve more power in the bioeconomical sphere? Or what challenges is it exactly? And I think we have to more critically than ever to look at everyone's aim. And then actually also that makes me make plaidoyer again for taking artistic research and hybrid arts in the center of our discussion, as we actually try to do this today in the panel. And actually it just convinces me more. With all the interdisciplinary panel, I think we could see, this is a sort of a final hypothesis, which is actually already inherent in the concept of the conference. But I just, you made me think also, even when you summed up actually the positions that we had and we are having in our show, that actually artists, they can put more interdisciplinary power into aspects like elaborating on biotechnology, because they have the bird's eye view. So that's the fascinating moment. They can, you had different examples, for instance, toxicity of waters, biochimeras, biochemical M/others, or any other part in the biochemical realm. So I just actually, this is what I wanted to give as a little feedback to your talk, because you presented new research in biophilosophy, but also bioethics, but then also referring to Haraway and new artistic positions. So you put this actually into the context of also the challenges of genetic modification. That was actually a little reply, which is actually really bringing us now to the final discussion. And so we've had a very intense program. We had started with M/other and mother actually as a challenge this morning. Yeah, should we kind of like sum up? What
Sure. I think early on, Astrida really made an interesting perspective when she was saying that what was missing from all the keywords that were sent in was the word mothers, and really wanted to bring in this analysis of the problematic situation of white feminism to the concept of mothers. And she stressed that, saying that, for instance, that non-white feminism doesn't seem to have this issue. And she was asking, where that was, and doing it actually from a very personal perspective on one level, but also from the personal level outward into a larger social and theoretical level. But then she tied it together with the works in the exhibition, which was really touching and very powerful. And then we had the first panel, which was M/others, Wombs and Placentas, which our colleague Tuche Errol moderated.
Mm-hmm. And we had elaborated on the phenomenon of biochemical metamorphosis, artistic and scientific interests in biochemical processes on the basis of iron in the placentas. Also molecular similarities between tumor and embryo. I really noted that. We had an interesting contribution from Margarita about materiality and living and non-living and vulnerability, and all on an interesting discussion on hormones and contraception. And we had also in that panel Aya Hasegawa, excuse me, who elaborated about her speculative artistic projects delivering a dolphin, or actually also the project delivering a shark, and speculating on possible future IVF possibilities. And that also raised a big conversation. And then we had the panel Fluid Inheritance.
Right, and with Spela Petric, Mary Magic, the philosopher Laura Benitez Valero, and then Naya Ankerfeld Baumann-Leahy. And in that Spela was telling us about the both about the work phytoteratology, but also in its origins in her attempt to make a biochemical, let's say, counter narrative to genetics in biotechnology, and in such a way that she was maybe coming also partially from a biochemist, but also in a kind of way that is challenging the hegemony of genetics, which certainly has a connection to patrimony and to property. Yeah, and then Mary Magic gave us a run through of the whole process of working with Life Patch on the River Jogja project on the Kale Chode, and how that created the work Milik Bersama Rekombinan. Laura Benitez Valero gave us a really interesting philosophical perspective on the potentials of trans feminism as opposed to transhumanism. So a way of using technologies to liberate instead of to colonize, and it's really nice because it was I think very much a theoretical dialogue with the works of Spela and Mary, and at the same time very much connected to her actual situation in Barcelona, where basically academics are losing jobs and falling into precarity due in part to the crisis, but also to I would say a kind of shock capitalist reaction to time of crisis. And then Naya Ankerfeld, Amanda Baum, and Rose Leahy gave a wonderful description of both the genesis and meaning of the work Mamalga, but also of their practice on the Danish coast in connection with sustainable algal culture, and also a way of mediating it to the public.
And then finally, in the panel C, modes of care, we could take advantage of the shared knowledge of 3 artists in the exhibition, the CAMILLE Diaries. Sonia Levy gave us a thorough insight in her artistic research, portraying the coral project in the Horniman Museum, and with this specific new project of cultivating corals and having them in the mesocosms in London, artificially having them with the IVF processed way of spawning. But with this, actually, she raised the questions of the ruins of the museum insofar as to juxtapose the care for corals with the overcome outdated system of natural history museums, as if the last ruin of a heteronormative Western colonialist system where we separate culture from nature and put taxonomy in a system, artificially systemized way. And also we got an insight in that panel into the artistic practice of Nicole Clauston and her fascination of microorganisms and the world of the microbiome. And so we got also a big insight into the works and the artistic methods by New York artist Tara Rhoda, and her fascination between the entanglements of plants and animals, which she visually elaborates with the biochemical nearness of hemoglobin and chlorophyll. And with this panel, we were very happy to share with you insights from Stefan, an anthropologist, Stefan Helmreich, excuse me, an anthropologist from MIT, who elaborated on the artistic approaches, especially Sonia's, and not only thinking of the phenomenon of the blue in the water, the blue as on the cyanotypes, and but also the blue as the Anthropocene blue, and also connecting this actually into our current world, the pandemic world, the pandemic blue. But then also we had an insight into India Mansoor's practice as a biologist, thinking about new forms of exploring biospheres. And all of this, and I think this actually combines all the panels and also the final contribution from Eben, that I think all in all, we discussed feminist, post-feminist, hydro-feminist, inside and outside views, together with post-human approaches, together with not losing my concentration because it's late, but then I wanted to say, all in all, the ethic question, I think, was very, very dominant in all the panels. And we have, actually, you want to have this text?
Yeah.
We have prepared a sort of like a final text with which maybe we can
go into some questions, especially to the artists, and a closing statement. And we're going to suggest here that proposing hybrid arts as science and technology studies or gender studies, feminist studies theory put into practice sells bioart rather short. The strict requirement of actually doing something makes it, in our humble opinion, for a much more refined result. For us, these artists to produce something, an interesting set of inquiry into the epistemological, ethical, aesthetic presents and futures, artistic and scientific as well as post-humanist and humanicist, perhaps even more exacting as they combine theory, research, and practice. But of course, hybrid arts don't have an academic industrial complex creating validation and attention. This infrastructure is still something in the process of being made. And so I really want to go back to this idea of the importance of wet practice, what I said in the introduction. And I think the importance of hybrid arts, of bioarts, becoming a field unto itself, as opposed to, in academic sense, an appendage to other fields of research.
Who wants to comment on that? Do you want to comment on that, Margarita or Nicole?
I can comment briefly. Yeah. I mean, I think that the work of working interdisciplinarily is, oh, there's my video, is probably, I think, at the core of some of the values of a practice like bioart, where you're kind of engaging a field of study where you're almost coming in, at least from my experience, as a novice, having not been brought up through like academic sciences. And so coming to a certain level in a lab where you have a very maybe different perspective or history than a lot of the other people who might be present, I just think then having a dialogue from different perspectives is really valuable.
Maybe Margarita, because in a way this is very much, I think, connected to your studies as well as your practice.
Oh yes, very much indeed. I can only agree with what Nicole has just commented, and with your general overview. And with this goes also my thank you to all contributors today. But I mean, we have been in dialogue profoundly and profusely about this and how it is still hard. I mean, it sounds paradoxical because, you know, I'm working between Germany and Helsinki, and then I have an international project, but still, it's still difficult to find the substrate in Germany, which is paradoxical, to support these kind of practices. And it is, if we, as I think we do, if we agree on the epistemological value of this kind of practice that is wet, so there is a direct engagement, and of course it's messy because engagement and research are messy. They have to be messy because vulnerability is at the core of and failure is at the core of understanding things. It is messy, but it needs to be supported, and it is transdisciplinary, so it may sometimes sound cryptic at the beginning. I mean, people say about why do you work with science? You're not a scientist. Yes, I'm a 100% purebred humanist, but I've always been messing around with wet stuff. So I learned to learn. And I can't speak as a scientist because I am not, but because I learned to learn and I learned to art practice to go beyond my boundaries, I believe that what emerges is something fertile. And the most, sometimes it may hurt that certain artistic or academic, I think rather an artistic establishment does not recognize this. I think that certain kind of academic areas do acknowledge its value way more than the artistic establishment does in general. And it's always surprising, but in a positive way, how people from completely different areas who don't even know about the existence of this kind of practice, when I talk about the work we do, I mean, my colleagues and I do, they say, oh yeah, but of course that makes sense. It's like a white elephant in the room. Like we need transdisciplinary practice because we are living in we are living in a time where disciplinary boundaries don't keep the pace of the transformations that we are facing.
Yeah, I think certainly the critique on Germany is interesting. It's really only very recently that we've been able to kind of jump over this kind of pigeonholing of what funding and what disciplines are. Even when interdisciplinary funding became popular in the arts, it was like, yes, but we mean between art and dance, or not between art and science. And there was a kind of science phobia. And scientists were nervous that if they worked with artists, they wouldn't be taken so seriously. And I would say there are, luckily in Berlin, several really interesting biologists who've been rather open to this.
Yes.
And if you go into the next generation of the postdocs, doctoral students, then it's, you know, a plethora, I would say. But, you know, so the future looks much more positive, but we're also really appreciative of some of the professors that we've collaborated with to arrange residencies and projects. But, you know, they're certainly exceptional at the moment. I think in the Netherlands and to some degree in England, or in the UK, it's been better. But you know, I suspect over the next decade it will improve here.
But I again, and with this, I want to acknowledge also the work that you have been doing, and many and others actors have been doing. So it's not that there is nothing, but maybe we can say there is a timid, it's a certain shyness. Although there has been very good examples and support, which are important to show how things are evolving, because it must be said.
Yeah, and I don't know, Tara or Amanda or Naya?
Yeah, I think in terms of distinguishing what the significance of creating is really about creating a space for bioart. I mean, it's not new for artists to collaborate and with scientists and with laboratories, but I think having a dedicated space for that to unravel without the initial expectations of what it means to be in a laboratory can be really important as an entry and access point. So I think, if anything, the reason why it is important to distinguish bioart as an art practice is to give it space and facility.
And I'm not sure that Naya or Amanda would consider themselves quite bio-artists, but I would definitely include their practice with living beings along the way that our colleagues in DIY Bio say we were always biohackers. And certainly once you start to create kinship with non-humans, with other humans, you start down and you do it in a way through art. You're starting down this road. So maybe Amanda or Naya want to contribute.
I don't know if I should just start. I'm here, so I don't have much capacity. Sorry, but I'm really enjoying. Yeah, listening.
Astrida would totally be extremely happy at this.
That is the human being. Yeah, so I'll just listen.
You have to be nice.
Yeah. Amanda, Naya?
Yeah, I'm here now. Thank you for such a nice day. I'm doing all different kind of projects, not just bioart, but I did study art science at the Art Academy in The Hague, and I collaborated with. I started to collaborate with a number of laboratories in the Netherlands. Before studying in the Netherlands, I was not really introduced to bioart, so I think it's definitely such an amazing place to be according to that kind of practice. I mean, now when you're speaking also about funding and stuff related to that. Yeah, well, for me, it's also really like a big factor is related to what Nicole was talking about with interacting with material or bacteria. I think I also graduated as a designer from the Danish Art Academy. And for me, it was definitely interesting to get a new relationship to the material as being alive. Because so usually materials would be something that you would just like go and buy at a store or take down from a shelf or whatever, not paying too much attention to, of course, where it came from, because you would still be like so into, oh, what kind of textile is this, and what quality of paper is this, and the fibers, but not really. That was what hit me until whenever I started to work with living materials. That was definitely changing the entire process, and I think that's very important to acknowledge, according to also, yeah, speaking about like sustainability and those kind of issues that we're globally dealing with right now.
Thank you. That was
Yeah.
good. We have somebody's Annemie Mice sent a comment, and she says art science is certainly a recognized domain, but it's just parallel to the regular art circuit. It's not integrated at all. Yeah, I would agree, but I'm not sure that's a negative thing. I started to get involved with arts as a 17-year-old in New York in the 1980s, so at the time of Soho and East Village. And so I kind of have a lot of experience and pain, you know, but also a lot of work experience also in the arts, the regular art circuit, as she says. And I actually find it a rather negative thing, because I think it's something that is, even when it comes to the level of biennales and festivals, so much connected with capitalism. And in the last 20, 30 years, so much about a buyer's market. I mean, literally art made for a collector who is, you know, not necessarily invested in the art beyond an image thing. And, you know, basically, as I said, I think the problematic with the with art that connects in any way to the market, even if it's through a supposedly off-market thing like a biennale, but always tied into it, is this connection with capitalism, which determines its forms and even its themes, and using them for its own ends. And so that, at least in Europe, and I think to a certain degree in Asia, and in North America, maybe it's more connected with academics through necessity. There's a parallel situation. In Europe, there's a very good funding situation vis-a-vis, you know, North America, it's horrible. And in Asia, it's very tricky, but it's created, I think, a situation that is, at least, yeah, it's by choice not integrated with the regular art circuit. And I find that a positive point. And I'm just trying to think if we have another question from Natasha sent in. No, that's the one. Okay.
I think it was a long day. I just wanted to ask if are there any last comments or questions? I mean, we had a lot of questions. We collected a whole catalog of questions during the day. Not that we wanted to actually sum it up again, at least not now, but in the next few days, weeks, months, and years. So maybe then we come to the end, and we're coming to the end and actually express gratitude. That's very important. So actually, let me, in the name of Art Laboratory Berlin, from all of us, thank, first of all, the speakers. And thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing knowledge. Thank you for elaborating on your specific fields, and also to take time to interdisciplinarily share thoughts of other speakers. I think we've had interesting talks, mind-blowing talks, and also very, very fruitful discussions. And I think we found also a new network of interdisciplinary knowledge sharing. I see already a lot of communications that have spun, and actually that we will weave throughout the next weeks and months. Thank you, speakers. Thank you, artists. Thank you, scholars. Thank you, scientists, to be here with us. We will definitely continue this. Thank you, audience, to be here with us. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for all the comments. We got a lot of positive feedback. I think we're totally pampered now. And thank you for your critical remarks, and dear audience. So you saw we had a live stream. We recorded everything, I think, quadruple time. So it's all there, and it will be all archived. Whenever you wanted to see a panel that you have not seen, you are very welcome to actually see this after the fact. Now, actually, what still is remaining, we want to, of course, thank also our team, and especially Tuje, who moderates and organized this conference with us. I want to thank my partner, Chris Lutz. Well, okay. That was such a pleasure to do that journey, and I'm happy to actually
Yeah.
endeavor more journeys in the future. I want to also thank Linus, who is sitting in front of us,
I
actually,
want
to
to thank,
do
thank
10
Natasha,
hours
who's been
of-
sending us all these, who's been taking care of social media and sending us all these messages.
And also thanks to Tim Doyson, in whose photo studio we are sitting here. Tim, Chris, Linus, and us, and me, for the whole day, because we have a sort of a quadruple streaming and recording, and we needed a very strong internet connection. So here we are, and we're coming to an end now, but I think with all these questions that we have raised, we have come also to a new start of new questions, of new projects, of new aspects. So let's hope to meet soon. And for now, I think we breathe, we relax. And I want to wish you all a wonderful evening, midday, morning, and night. Thank you so very much for being with us.